Hi, this is Jeff at Mississippi in the Civil War, back with another episode. This is part one of a two-part series, and it's going to cover Mississippians who served in the Army of Tennessee. I've already done a three-part series on Mississippians who served in the Army of Northern Virginia, so this is kind of a follow-up showing or giving some background on the Mississippians who served in one of the other major armies, the Army of Tennessee. And this will be a two-part episode. Hope you enjoy it. And I thought what would be better to as an illustration for this talk than a battle flag of a Mississippi unit that served in the Army of Tennessee. So my background flag is the flag of the 10th Mississippi Infantry, one of the hardest fighting Mississippi regiments that served in the Civil War. This flag is in the collections of the State Museum, and it is on display at the Mississippi Museum of History in Jackson. And I love to go over and take a look at all of their flag collection, which if you've never seen it, they have an amazing flag collection. But I'm getting a little off topic, so to get back to Mississippians in the Army of Tennessee, the Army of Tennessee was one of just over 24 independent field armies that were created by the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. Now, the Army of Tennessee was not named as such until November of 1862, but its history actually dates from the very first of the war, when its predecessor units came into being. And upon leaving the Union, each succeeding state created its own army. And eventually the state armies and the state organized military units are going to be absorbed into the Confederate service. The Army of Tennessee evolved from these forces that had been raised primarily by the western states of the Confederacy. And the force that became the Army of Tennessee had its origins in the summer of 1861. When President Jefferson Davis sent General Albert Sidney Johnston, shown here in the inset picture, to command all of the Confederate forces in the west, basically everything between the Appalachian Mountains to the east and the Ozark Mountains to the west, with the only exception being he was not in command of the troops defending the coastline along the Gulf of Mexico. By the winter of 1861-1862, Johnston had his 40,000-man army spread thin, trying to defend a very long line. You can see in this map here, which is done by Hal Jesperson at cwmaps.com. If you've never taken a look at his maps, you should go to his website. He does these amazing maps, puts them out on the internet, makes them available with no license fees or anything. Highly recommend it. But by the winter of 61-62, Johnston had his 40,000-man army spread all across the Western Theater, trying to defend a very long line running from Columbus, Kentucky to the Cumberland Gap in Tennessee. And among the troops that were part of this huge force trying to defend this very long line were 12 regiments of Mississippi infantry. And Johnston's defensive line was fatally ruptured on February 16, 1862, when a Union Army under General Ulysses S. Grant captured Fort Donelson, taking about 11,500 Confederates prisoner at Fort Donelson, which is on the Cumberland River in Tennessee. And among these prisoners were approximately 3,000 Mississippians. And shown here is an illustration from the Library of Congress just depicting the Battle of Fort Donelson. And among the men who fought for Mississippi at Fort Donelson was George E. Estes, a second lieutenant in the 14th Mississippi Infantry. And in a post-war account about the fighting at Fort Donelson, Estes wrote, quote, "I started out in May 1861 from home with the expressed intention of cleaning up all Yankeedom. I had been taught by demagogues and politicians to believe that I could whip a cowpen full of common Yankees. I lived and acted upon this delusion until General Grant and his army met us at Fort Donelson. I soon found that the Yankees could shoot as far and as accurately as I could, and from then until the end of the war, I was fully of the opinion that the United States Army was fully prepared to give me all the fight I wanted. And he was quite correct in that. The Confederates did learn that the Union troops in the Western Theater were very hard fighters, very determined, and they were going to put up one heck of a fight. And one of the Mississippi newspaper, the Weekly Mississippian, wrote on the fall of Fort Donelson an article entitled "The Reverse in Tennessee," and they wrote, "A great battle has been fought and lost. Fort Donelson, which was so long and gallantly defended by a band of devoted heroes, has been taken from us, and our enemies have apparently opened a way for the advancing columns into the heart of the South. Immense numbers have, for the time, prevailed over the noblest resistance ever displayed, standing up against fearful odds, in the best cause which ever led a soldier in the field or sustained a martyr at the stake." That's from the Weekly Mississippian, February 26, 1862. And they were quite correct. It did open up the way to the interior of the Western Theater, and it was going to cause no end of problems for the Confederates. And after his line was breached, General Johnston pulled back his army to Corinth, Mississippi, where he united his command, and with new reinforcements, he created what came to be known as the Army of Mississippi in March 1862. And shown in this illustration here is a great wartime image of Corinth, Mississippi, showing the Tishomingo Hotel and the railroad depot at Corinth circa 1862. And this is from the Library of Congress collections. Now, the Army of Mississippi that Johnston created was made up in large part of men from the western half of the Confederacy. The largest part of them hailed from the states of Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and Tennessee, with a fair number also from the states of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Missouri. In this army were 8 Mississippi infantry regiments, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 9th, 10th, 15th, and 22nd Infantry Regiments, and 1 infantry battalion, the 3rd Mississippi Infantry Battalion. And if you don't know the difference between a battalion and a regiment was made up of 10 companies, usually of about 100 men each, nominal strength on paper of 1,000 men. In practice, they were nowhere near that number. They were probably closer somewhere to less than half of that. A battalion was made up of less than 10 companies, usually about somewhere around 7. And it was just a way to designate a unit that was smaller than a regiment. And one of the problems that the Army of Mississippi faced was inadequate leadership. They really had a problem with a lack of qualified officers to lead their soldiers. The majority of Southerners with pre-war military experience, most of them came from the eastern states of the Confederacy, and very few of these men were going to serve in the Western Theater. To make matters worse, what few trained military men there were in the Western Theater tended to join units early in the war that got sent to Virginia, because that's, of course, where they thought the early fighting was going to take place. And for example, here I've shown this article from the Natchez Weekly Courier. This is an article about the departure of the Natchez Fencibles. They became part of the 12th Mississippi Infantry. They spent the entire war fighting in the Army of Northern Virginia. And this was very common. You saw a lot of very talented officers from Mississippi leaving in 1861 with units that went to Virginia and spent the entire war fighting in the Eastern Theater. So you're going to see with the Western Theater, the Army of Tennessee, the Western Army is never going to have the strength of command that was enjoyed by the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, Albert Sidney Johnston had about 40,000 men in and around Corinth, and he decided rather than wait for the Union forces to build up and reach a critical mass that he couldn't hope to stop, he was going to take the initiative and attack them, and hopefully with surprise be able to ambush them and destroy the Union Army before it even knew what was going on. Ulysses S. Grant's army was at Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, just about 20 miles away from Corinth. and the two forces were about equal in numbers. So on April 6, 1862, Johnson surprises the Union Army at Shiloh. In very fierce fighting, they drive the Yankees back to the Tennessee River, threatening for a time to cut them off and destroy them. But in the end, the Federals were able to hold out that first day. In savage fighting in that very first day of the battle, one Mississippi infantry unit, the 6th Mississippi, suffered almost 70% casualties. Out of the 425 men they took into the battle, over 300 were killed or wounded. This was going to be the highest casualty total for a Mississippi unit in the entire war. It was just an incredible loss of men. And shown here in this illustration is the flag of the Lowry Rifles, Company D of the 6th Mississippi Infantry. And this flag is on display at the Museum of Mississippi History in Jackson. And I have a great love for this flag. I had two relatives that fought in the Lowry Rifles. My great-great-grandfather, Littleton Hardy Johnson, and his half-brother, William Harper, who was actually went on to become captain of the Lowry Rifles. They were both members of the unit. They both fought at Shiloh, and fortunately, both of them came out without being killed or wounded. And there's a little quote here I'd like to read. It's from Thomas W. Smith, who served in the 38th Mississippi Infantry. Writing in 1908, he kind of summed up Shiloh pretty well. He said, "Shiloh, with its terrible loss of life, gave to the South and her people a foretaste of the awful holocaust that was demanded of her in her efforts to be free and independent." And he was quite right in that. Shiloh was the first big bloodletting in the West, and it was kind of a harbinger of things to come. The battles were just going to get bigger and bloodier as time went on. And this illustration is called the Battle of Shiloh, done many years after the war. And the inset picture is Colonel James R. Chalmers of Mississippi. And after the first day's fighting had ended at Shiloh, the Confederates seemed to be poised on the brink of victory. They had pushed the Union forces back to the Tennessee River, but they hadn't been able to break their line. So during the night, the Union Army was reinforced, and with this infusion of fresh troops, the Federals went over on the offensive on April 7th. And unable to stop the surging blue tide, the rebel army was forced to retreat. In 2 days of fighting, the Confederates had suffered nearly 11,000 casualties, including the Confederate Army commander, Albert Sidney Johnston, who had been killed on the first day, leaving PGT Beauregard in command. The Mississippi Brigade, commanded by James R. Chalmers, consisting of the 5th, 7th, 9th, and 10th Mississippi Infantry Regiments, was especially hard hit at Shiloh, taking 445 casualties out of the approximately 1,739 men engaged. And the brigade fought so well that General Bragg would later give them a nickname that they would carry proudly throughout the war. He called them his high-pressure brigade. And to the men in those Mississippi units making up the High Pressure Brigade, they took that name as a mark of honor, and they would use that nickname for the remainder of the war, and even into the post-war period. The men that served in those regiments would proudly state that they were members of Chalmers High Pressure Brigade. And Private Augustus H. Mecklin of the 15th Mississippi Infantry, who's shown in a post-war picture in the inset here, he never forgot the horrible sights he witnessed when the Confederates retreated from Shiloh. And this other picture showing Union dead on a battlefield, this is actually a picture of Gettysburg. There are no known photographs of Confederate or Union dead at the Battle of Shiloh. So I just kind of use this picture of Gettysburg just to kind of set the tone for this quote from Augustus H. Mecklin. And he wrote about the retreat from Shiloh, quote, Then it was when the veil of night was rent and the curtain of darkness was lifted that sickening sights fell before my eyes. Near me at one time lay lay a dead man, his bloated, ghastly, bloody face turned up to the pattering raindrops. Not far off, another flare revealed a body half covered in a pool of water. At another flash, I saw one of our men stumble over a corpse that lay in the road, and again, as the light of heaven flashed across the scene of blood, I saw a large piece of ground literally covered with dead, heaped and piled upon each other. Shiloh really made a very strong impression on the men that fought there for both sides. For men on both the Union and Confederate Army, Shiloh was for many of them their first real battle, and the loss of so many lives really it made a mark, and the men that fought at that battle never forgot it. You see some very compelling reminiscences and quotes from the men that fought at Shiloh, because it was their first real introduction to the true horrors of war. And this is another illustration of Corinth, and this is labeled General Beauregard's Headquarters, May 31st, 1862. And again, it's showing the Tishomingo Hotel with the railroad in the foreground. This is from the Library of Congress collections. And in the inset, of course, is an illustration of General Beauregard. And after Shiloh, the Confederates retreated back to Corinth under direction of PGT Beauregard. The Yankees did not pursue immediately, and when they did pursue, it was very slow and halting, giving Beauregard plenty of time to beef up the defenses of Corinth and also to bring in reinforcements. By late May of 1862, 11 more Mississippi infantry regiments had joined this army, and with reinforcements received from other states, the Southern Army at Corinth had grown to approximately 66,000 men. But by late May, the federal force inching toward Corinth had finally reached the outskirts of the city. They had some 110,000 men, and faced with such a great disparity in numbers, Beauregard withdrew from the city on the night of May 29th and retreated back down to Tupelo, Mississippi. Now, shortly after this retreat, Beauregard was replaced as Army commander by Jefferson Davis. He named General Braxton Bragg, shown in the inset here, as the new Army commander. And soon after taking over, the general transferred 4 Mississippi infantry regiments out of his army, leaving 14 Mississippi units in the Army of Mississippi. And Bragg decided not to wait for the Federals to attack him. He decided to take the initiative. So, leaving about 30,000 men in Mississippi, Bragg transported the remainder of his army to Chattanooga, Tennessee by rail, and from there Bragg was going to launch an invasion of Kentucky that he hoped would draw the Federals into the Bluegrass State after him. And shown in this illustration from Harper's Pictorial History of the War is a view of wartime Chattanooga. And advancing from Chattanooga on August 28, 1862, with 30,000 men, the initial battle of the campaign took place at Munfordville, Kentucky, on September 14, 1862. And this illustration is one showing advancing Confederates being decimated by an artillery shell that has just exploded. And Chalmers' Mississippi Brigade was part of the attack on the fortified garrison of the town of Munfordville, and they were repulsed with extremely heavy losses. They had about 288 men killed or wounded. The 10th Mississippi, which was part of Chalmers' Brigade, was particularly hard hit, having 13 killed and 95 wounded in the battle. And it was an inconclusive battle, and the Confederates were not victorious. And Bragg's march into Kentucky culminated with the Battle of Perryville, Kentucky, on October 8, 1862. The battle produced lots of casualties, but no clear winner, and Bragg was forced to retreat back into Tennessee when the campaign ended. Confederate casualties in the battle were 510 killed, 2,635 wounded, and about 251 missing. A number of the Mississippi units engaged in the fight. Among the hardest hit was the 34th Mississippi Infantry. The regiment had all 3 of its field officers wounded, and one company in the unit only had 7 men left after the battle. And again, this illustration is from the Library of Congress collections, and it's just a great, I think, a great view, giving you just a little piece of the Battle of Perryville. Now, during a lull after the Battle of Perryville, the Army of Mississippi was going to be merged with the Army of Kentucky. This is going to happen November 20th, 1862, and out of this merger was going to be created the Army of Tennessee. Now, this newly established army was camped at Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 27 miles from Nashville, which is going to be up in the corner here. In late December 1862, the Federal Army at Nashville under General William S. Rosecrans advanced on Murfreesboro to attack Bragg's army. The Confederate commander beat him to the punch, however, attacking on December 31st and driving back the surprised Federals, but failing to make any kind of decisive breakthrough. On January 2nd, 1863, Bragg launched a second attack, but it was going to be repulsed with extremely heavy losses. The Confederate Army had 10,000 casualties at Murfreesboro, and the Mississippians in the Army were particularly hard hit, suffering about 1,513 killed, wounded, or missing. Many of these men became casualties while trying to take a very strong Federal position in the Round Forest. So many Mississippians died trying to take this small patch of woods that the area was later nicknamed Mississippi's Half Acre. And the 29th Mississippi Infantry probably had the highest casualties of any unit from the state at the Battle of Murfreesboro, having 34 men killed and 202 wounded. And shown in the picture here is a modern-day picture of the Stones River battlefield taken by Hal Jesperson. And in the illustration is an article about the Battle of Murfreesboro that appeared in the Natchez Daily Courier, January 13, 1863. And I'm going to leave you with a quote. Whoops, let me go back. I'm going too far. Let me leave you with a quote. This again is another illustration of the Battle of Murfreesboro. And this is a quote from Private John W. Simmons, who served in the 27th Mississippi Infantry. And he fought at Murfreesboro, and the battle left quite an impression on him. Writing after the war, he said of this battle, "I believe I saw as much war as any man in it, never being absent, but I never in all the war saw as many dead men of one single command in so small a place as I did there on the plains of Murfreesboro. Itala County ought to erect a monument on the spot to mark the place where her gallant sons fell." And before I go, for those of you that are wanting to read more about the Army of Tennessee, there's a 2-volume set that I highly recommend. It's an older set, but it still holds up very well. It's by Thomas Lawrence Connolly. Volume 1 is called Army of the Heartland, and it covers the Army of Tennessee 1861 to 1862. This is the front piece. And the Volume 2 is Autumn of Glory, the Army of Tennessee 1862 to 1865. And if you want an in-depth history of the Army of Tennessee, this is a good 2-volume set. It's still in print. You can pick it up easily online. Another very good one, if you wanted to know more about what life was like for the men who fought in the Army of Tennessee, a very good book is Soldiering in the Army of Tennessee by Larry Daniel. That's another very good book I highly recommend. But before I go, if you have any questions or comments, please just leave them, and I will be glad to answer them. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and a like. I enjoy doing these programs. I hope you enjoy watching them, and I will be back very soon with part 2 of Mississippians in the Army of Tennessee. And thank you.